We are focusing on psychodynamic theory of the person. We're going to explore key assumptions of the psychodynamic approach, the id, the ego, the superego, defense mechanisms, and transference. So let's start with an activity to set the scene. So you get a pen and paper. Take a moment to think. If you had no moral, social, ethical, or personal repercussions, what would you like to do or have wanted to do? Now, this could be an activity, an action, or an aim. There are no societal rules to judge you and no one to say what's right or wrong. Write down what you would like to do or have done on a piece of paper. Key assumptions of the psychodynamic approach. All unconscious activity determines our behavior. All behavior has an unconscious cause. All behavior, therefore, is determined by the dynamic and sometimes conflicting activity of our unconscious. Our behavior and feelings as adults, including psychological problems, are rooted in our childhood experience. A focus on understanding the whole person, including their strengths and vulnerabilities. The aim of psychodynamic therapy is to bring awareness to unconscious thoughts. Sigmund Freud. Many psychodynamic concepts originate from Freud. We are animals driven by basic biological motives. The emergence of society required us to bring our animal impulses under control. Freud believed that our personality, psych, contains several parts that are continually at war with each other. The conflict that arises between these parts is what drives behavior. And these parts are defined as the id, ego, and superego. The role of the superego, when you wrote down what you wanted to do, your id was asked to speak. So read out what is on the piece of paper and play the role of the superego and give reasons why desire should not be fulfilled. The reasons you have given are what are called defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms, according to Freud, the ego has developed what he calls defense mechanisms to cover for the wild demands of the id, which would be rarely socially acceptable. Defenses can be described as a combination of denial and repression with different ways of rationalization. When we rationalize, we're distorting the facts to make the event or our own impulses less threatening, that is, diluting the anxiety to a manageable level. We often come to believe our own distortions or excuses or even lies. Examples. You want to each eat 2 scoops of ice cream, but you know it is not good for you, so you attempt to repress your desire. You didn't succeed at the presentation, but you tell yourself that you didn't really want the job anyway. You feel angry with your friend. Instead of expressing your anger at him or her, you go for a run. Identify a time when you've used the defense mechanisms and describe what the id wanted, describe what the superego said, and describe how the ego rationalized what the id wanted with reference to a particular defense mechanism. Take some time to think about it, or maybe come back to it later, but the exercise is useful. Defense mechanisms, 2 main parts of defense mechanisms. 1, denial or distortion of reality to find a state of calm. 2, these things happen unconsciously. Everyone engages in defense mechanisms on a daily basis. When they become ingrained by and they become ingrained, they become problematic. The role of the therapist in psychodynamic is to help the client see what they can't see. When the client wants to change the subject, something feels threatened. Anxiety shuts down the difficult emotion. Difficult feelings are triggered from the unconscious. Defense mechanisms help cope with this difficulty. The therapist notices the presence of defense mechanisms that are used to distort or deny reality and brings this to the awareness of the client. And the client acknowledgement of what is happening relieves the difficult feelings. Transference is when a person unconsciously redirects feelings, desires, expectations to another. And this happens often in therapy. Trying to recreate a past relationships happens in therapy because the client is in a safe space, which allows the unconscious to speak. Countertransference is where the therapist reacts out of transference. This can be unhealthy. Transference can be considered a good or a bad thing. Transference should be explored in the therapy session, otherwise the client may be stuck in the past. Transference will indicate when unresolved issues need to be explored. Identifying the cause of transference, for example, a behavior or word that the therapist uses, which will trigger the unconscious trigger.